get out your set of favorite dice, a piece of paper, and a pencil, and get ready to roll some persuasion checks because this is a Chaotic Neutrals podcast where we talk about anything and everything D&D while um wow, I already fudged it up. Where we talk about anything D&D. I'm Matt, and this is
Annie Mae.
and today we are going to be talking about the basics of what you need to get started to play D&D.
Yes, I have all three of my core rulebooks sitting with me.
Oh god, I haven't seen a core rulebook in a while because I've been on Roll20 and D&D Beyond so much lately.
Yes.
Uh, do you want to start then, since you got the core rulebooks?
I I suppose so. I have kicked things off. Uh, yeah. So core rulebooks. They're a beautiful mess of guidelines, aren't they?
Oh, they really are.
I just I I know they're called the core rulebooks, but really, so long as you understand how the player's rules works and basic roles and roll calls are made, you don't even need these books. Literally, I've barely ever touched the DM's guide. I skimmed through it whenever I first got it so that I could understand basic DMing abilities. But the
Mm-hmm.
DM's guide is not a core rule book. It's literally
It's
a
just a guide.
guide. It is literally a guide, not necessary at all. I'm sure it's useful, but I personally have never read through the book, and I'm DMing a campaign, and I'm doing pretty well, so.
I'd think so.
Yeah, personally, DM's guide, not even necessary. So you don't have to waste your $60 on that. Especially if you can go to with the internet, you can just get onto the internet and look up tutorials on how to do basic DMing, which kind of flows into the player's handbook, another core rule book, which is only a core rule book because it holds some important information for how to, like, for the necessary stats on how to build a character. I would definitely say buy the player's handbook if you really wanted to get into D&D, but even that's not necessary if you have access to the internet, because thank you
Yeah.
D&D Beyond, it gives us all the basic classes and races and all that. So,
Right?
you know,
Yeah, it just everything's moved to the internet, which makes things so much easier. Unless, again, that's something you don't unfortunately have is
yeah,
the internet.
yeah, if you don't have access to the internet, these books are invaluable. But if you do, then, like, hey, if the Dungeon Master's Guide is basically pointless because the player, it just adds some frills and extra bobs onto the bells and whistles onto being a DM. So long as you understand how the system works within the player's handbook, how the player rules work, you understand how the DM's rules work. The DM just has some extra, um, what's the word?
Mm-hmm.
Responsibilities, you know?
Yeah.
But I would definitely say player's handbook is, while not entirely necessary, definitely one I would highly recommend picking up anyway.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. But
Um,
but the monster manual is a different story altogether.
yes.
As a DM,
Yeah.
this book is invaluable. I have flipped through it so many times looking for monsters to plan for encounters, looking for what I might need in future events, looking for the stat blocks I need in the moment. It's a
Mm-hmm.
very, very useful book. Definitely a must have for a DM. Absolutely.
Yeah. Definitely.
But these are all like, again, if you know where to look, you don't even need that technically. Because, again, the internet is there, you know? But I
Yeah,
personally feel like, yeah, as a DM, I would always want this over the internet. Because the
yeah,
internet, for me, is
yeah,
harder to search and not as instantaneous as a book. Like, a book
yeah.
is right there, easy to flip through. You can, if you've got the page number memorized, or if you've got the page tabbed, you got a bookmark, easy, straight there, and you have it all. You don't have to wait for a loading bar or, the internet to process what you're searching.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely the Monster Manual is absolutely the book you need as a DM.
I would agree. I haven't done any DMing myself, nor have I ever looked through a monster manual, but I would agree that that would probably be in the best interest to have.
Mm-hmm. But that's for a DM. Does a player need this?
Yeah.
Absolutely not.
No.
I don't think a player will ever need this. And unless you're intending to be a DM, don't waste your $60 on this. Wait until you feel confident enough to be a DM. At least until you've played as a player enough to understand the rules to where you could then spout them back out to other players. Once you're at that
Yeah.
point, you're basically DMing, and that's when you should actually become a DM. And that's when you need the
Yeah.
monster manual. But I feel like that really addresses a situation where we should address the two sets individually. We should start with players, and then we can move on to DMs. What do you need as a DM instead of a player? So I think we'll start with players
Yes.
first.
Yes.
So as a player, because you've actually been playing a player as a player recently, I have, but I've also been DMing a lot, so it's gonna get mixed up for me. So, like, what do you feel like you need as a player, since you've only ever played as a player, never DM'd?
Well, I guess the first thing is the basic understanding of how the game works. And then I guess you need to check the like at least the player's handbook and God, my brain died right on the spot. Yeah, what I would say is you need an initial basic understanding of the game, someone who can get you into the game, people who can also help you more often than not to um re go through things, understand the basics from the player's handbook, creating a character, the character sheets. It's also better if you're playing with at an actual table with your character sheet to use, pencil instead of like anything that's permanent, so it's easier to erase and change, so you can edit your character sheet fluidly. And I guess I'd start with something easy. It's an easier character to a class that's easy enough to understand initially to play.
Yeah,
Um, that sort of thing.
I completely understand that. I definitely understand the whole sitting at a table thing, because for the longest time, 5 years now, I've been playing digitally, digital tabletops. That's all I've
Ever
played. On
Same. That's all I've played. I've never been able to sit at a table because it's just there's nowhere near around me, nor people around where I live to, play.
Yeah,
So
earlier this year though, maybe
otherwise,
about halfway through, maybe a little earlier, I started playing a physical tabletop game, and oh my gosh, it's one of the greatest experiences I've ever had. I cannot recommend enough. If you can at a play a physical face-to-face game. Obviously that's a little difficult with
yeah,
current situations, but
yeah,
I still feel like if you ever get the chance, absolutely try to play physically with a physical set of dice, physical piece of paper, pen, or well, maybe not a pen, but a pencil. Although
Hmm.
I do have some people at my in my group that I play with on Monday nights who play with pen, and they just scribble out information and rewrite it, and then every day they come back with a fresh piece of paper that has all the information
I was
from
gonna say
last week, and I'm like,
because
what?
I was
But
gonna say 'cause that's a lot of work. But
it is.
it'd be easier to use a pencil, just erase what you need and fill in the blank again.
Yeah, I created
Um,
myself a character journal, a whole journal dedicated to my
that's
character.
that's cool.
I know, but
One,
I use pencil for that.
yeah, I think initially I started with 3.5 from my father getting me introducing me and my brother to it. We started with 3.5, and that was actually for me pretty complicated. There were so many extra things compared to 5e
Yeah, I
nowadays
heard
because
that. I heard.
it's 5e is like the keep it simple stupid version of D&D compared
Yeah,
to 3.5.
yeah, I heard that basically all the different like categories, all the skills and on a character sheet are basically categorized versions of the skills in 3.5, which is
Yeah, they're just
insane.
condensed into the skills of 5e.
Yeah, that's pretty insane. Um, but yeah, I definitely agree with you on the whole physical tabletop thing. Like we said earlier, absolutely, if you're a player, I would highly recommend getting the player's handbook.
Yes.
You don't need it if you have access to the internet, but if you don't have access to the internet, absolutely buy it. I would, even if you do have access to the internet, I would still say
A,
buy the book.
a physical copy never hurts
Oh no,
to have around.
absolutely. It's definitely more satisfying to flipping through the pages. It's just like it just feels good to have the physical book.
Yeah.
Um, for like other physical things you definitely need like a piece of paper of some kind or a small notebook or something
Yes.
in order to write down all of the information that you have for your game. It's you got to write down the information for your character, information for your you don't if you have the player's handbook, you don't need to write it down. Mostly. There are some things like your hit
Yeah.
points and your armor class and your stats, but and your equipment. But when it comes to your class and your race, just keep track of what level you are, and that should be fine. If you have the player's handbook, just keep your class bookmarked, your race bookmarked in the
Yeah, and then you
background.
just
But
yeah.
yeah, for the numbers, you definitely need to write those down, and this stuff that you have on you, your clothes, your tools, your weapons,
Equipment, weapons,
yes, all
spells
that.
if you choose such a character.
Yeah, if you have spells, you also need to write down those. But
That was the
yes,
biggest spells was one of the biggest reasons why I initially wouldn't do a spellcaster. I stuck with martial characters
uh
that weren't casters
yeah,
initially.
yeah,
Thordis was the first half caster as an introduction to spellcasting.
mhm. As I heard it,
Everything leads back to Thordis.
as Joe Cat,
Thordis is the Illuminati.
as Joe Cat called it, the one of the bisexual classes. Um,
Oh, good lord.
yeah, yeah. But I would say that the only other physical piece of equipment you need, other than the player's handbook and a piece of paper and a pencil and eraser, um, would be dice. But there are
Yes.
many different ways to get those. First and
Yes.
so first you should know what type of dice you need, which is like a 20-sider, a 6-sider. Actually, let's do these from biggest to largest, from biggest to smallest. So,
Hmm.
you need a 20-sided die, a 10-sided die, a 12-sided, 10-sided, 8-sided, 6-sided, and 4-sided. Those are all you need, and if you can get one, a percentile die, a D100, but a 100-sided. But that's not as necessary. You can always just roll the D10 twice and use one to represent the tens place and another to represent the hundreds place. Or the ones place. Yeah.
I know I'm always going off topic. A 100-sided die, I've seen those. Like, they almost don't even have size. It's just a ball with numbers on it.
I know, right? It's
And
insane.
then I see the percentiles, which is just a D10 with all the numbers with a 0 added to the end. And then you just roll that with a normal D10, and there's your percentage.
But yeah. Yeah, definitely like 7 or 6 dice? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5,
20,
6. Yeah.
12,
It's
10,
6.
8, 6, and 4.
Yep, so 6 dice total. 7 if you want to be technical and you have like a tens place die, but that's not necessary. You should absolutely have those 6 core die because they are the foundations of Dungeons and Dragons. Some are used more often than others. Like the D20, the 20-sider is used on a regular basis. The 12 is rarely used at all. It really depends on your character, so you don't always need them, but it will be based off character. So I would say that is absolutely you should have a set of the 6 core dice for nothing else other than to have them just in case. Also, it's just satisfying to see all those dice.
Mm-hmm.
Other than that, though...
But I hear if you're not careful, they get addicting. You just want more and more and more of the shiny number stones.
Dice goblins. I like to...
Yes.
Yes, you become a dice goblin, and I like to call dice the polyhedral gods of fate.
They're the shiny quick clacks.
Yes.
Yeah.
With that in mind, I think that's the only physical... I think that's the last physical item you really need. The book, the paper, something to write with, and on. And then dice. The players, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have access to the internet, the book and even the dice aren't necessary, theoretically. You just need something that has access to all 6 dice. You either need like the physical stuff, a friend who has the physical dice, an app, or you can search, literally Google has a dice roller with one of every type. So, no problem there.
Along with just the materials to play, you also need a group.
Yes.
That's kind of important too.
Mm-hmm. That is.
And a group where everybody can get along and it's not real, toxic.
I agree with that. It's definitely not easy finding your first group. Or finding a good group.
No.
Or your
exactly.
first group, either.
Even online, even on Roll20 and stuff, it's still really hard to find a group, no matter how experienced you are.
5 years of doing this, and we're still trying to put together a group that can stay consistent. Entirely.
Yes.
Now, you will never have a fully consistent group. Never. I have tried, and even I can't be... Darren and I can't be 100% consistent. Rex can't be 100% consistent. We're not... You will never have a truly, perfectly consistent group. And I see
unless your friends are robots.
Yeah, and I see memes about it all the time. That said, it's not that necessary. You just have to have a group that's willing to play. Even if you have to decide it on a dime, Like, are we going to play D&D tonight? Sure.
Yeah. Consistency, like the cake, is a lie.
Heh. I get it. He.
Yes.
But it's very difficult to find...
There goes.
Very, very difficult to find a good group of people, isn't it? Like, not just...
It really is.
It's not just that it's difficult to find people, period. It's easy to find them at times. It's difficult to find the right people.
And it's difficult to find ones that are willing to stay.
Yeah. A lot of times you'll have people who are the right people, but they can't stay for very long for one reason or another, you know?
Yeah, yeah, life gets in the way, unfortunately.
And the
If
longer,
nobody, if everybody in the world had no life, we could all just play one big massive D&D game, I'm sure.
and the longer somebody sticks around, the more likely they are to eventually back out, I've noticed.
Yes.
Because, like, other than me and Darren and Rex, everybody else has had to back out for one reason or another because of life, you know?
Yeah, I had work and I had to stop for like, I don't know, a good year or two.
Mm-hmm. For, and then we had, like, Titan, who stuck around for about, I want to say around a year, maybe a year and a half. He was there. He
I'm,
joined at the tail end of our Tomb of Annihilation campaign, which ended last year,
yeah.
and then he
Well,
stuck
he's,
around till a little over halfway through this year. So he stuck around for a good while, longer than a
I'm,
lot of
well,
people.
he's the one who's in what, Australia? Is the
Yeah,
time
he
zone
was. Yeah,
difference?
he's in Australia.
Yeah, I'm surprised with getting up that early in the morning, I'm surprised he stayed as long as he did because
Yeah,
I don't know if I could even do that myself, and
1 a.m. in the
that's
morning for him. Like, goodness, I could not do that at all.
no.
I'm. That's about the time I'm going to bed. Sometimes.
Unless you're an insomniac and don't sleep.
Fair.
But yeah, no, that timing is like really off. Would have to be like, much later in the day for it to be feasible for him. For us,
Or
much
much.
later in the day going on like evening or even early in the morning ourselves would be midday probably there.
Yeah. Yeah. Um. With all that said, though, consistency again doesn't have to happen. You guys,
No.
players can always just kind of like a group can always just say we're gonna play here and now at this point in time, or they can say,
Yeah,
hey,
there's
are you guys cool to play today or tomorrow? And all unanimously say sure or no, and that
yeah,
actually
it all
also,
just comes back to that.
yeah, that also lends itself to another thing where you don't have to have everybody unless somebody is like, unless they're all necessary. If one person misses a session, just one session, it's not the end of the world. Unless that person is like very important to a specific point in the story. Like, dungeon masters do not exclude players when they are a focal point, that or have been
Yeah.
a focal point for a long time. There have been times where I've had to cancel sessions specifically because certain players aren't there. And I'm like, I'm sorry guys, but I really need this one player. Otherwise, I can't make things happen, you know?
Yeah,
And
exactly.
and that's just how things go, but what when it comes down to it, typically you aren't going to have to worry about having every player there. If you've got, let's say you've got a group of 5, which is about average. If you're missing one player or even two, it's not the end of the world. Definitely it would be ideal to only be missing one at the most, but the 3 players can make some progress in a campaign. Just make sure they're not getting ready to come up on a boss.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
You don't want to be missing people when there's a boss fight.
I've only been playing for 5 years. You've been playing for longer. What type of? And I've typically found players who've actually meshed real well with our group most of the time. It's hardly ever anybody who's caused issues, and if so, that didn't last long, and they weren't terrible issues. So I imagine you probably had
Yeah.
some worse experiences than I.
Not
Not.
not entirely. In reality, it's we've found players that it would we'd test for like a session. We'd have them join. We'd play a session, and whether or not they showed up the next session was whether or not they showed up, wanted to keep playing. There have been players that would a while and then just completely vanish from like the Discord server,
Yeah.
from the group chats, in between sessions and just disappear. Like, if you okay, not having fun, okay, goodbye. But for the most part, it's mostly just been people have been pretty compatible, but sometimes they just have to quit because real life gets in the way. Or there was a couple of times with murder hobos
Yeah.
to the point where me and my character about just turned around and left them in the dungeon they wanted to go back to so badly.
Yeah. I remember you talked about that in a prior episode.
Yeah, everything comes back to Thordis.
I know, right?
Thordis is God at this
Forest
point.
is God.
Thordis is D&D legend.
But I will say, don't let those players discourage you from trying to get together a group. If somebody doesn't mesh well
Oh
with the
yeah.
group, just tell them. Just tell them, hey, things aren't working. Either fix it up. We gotta find some way to fix this up, or you gotta leave. One or the other. You know? And if you
Yeah.
feel like there's a whole group, if you feel like your entire group does not mesh well, and it probably means go find a whole new group. I remember when I first
Mm,
started, I tried to get my siblings to play with me on the regular.
oh boy.
They did not want to play at all. And eventually I got sick of it and was like, you know what, screw it. And I went to the internet, hopped on Roll20, and found this group that I've been playing with for 5 years now. Or
What's
found
really
this
nice is
DM, really.
yeah, what's really nice is when you're on Roll20 and you find somebody who's like who pays is like a subscriber, got the premium for Roll20 and can do all the dynamic lighting, the macros, and all the things to where you can health trackers, rings around the tokens that change from green to red depending on how badly injured you are. The dynamic lighting, so you actually don't have to like cover the map in a black square and remove bits by bit.
Dang.
It only shows for like it only exposes areas based on what you can see, what your character can see.
Dang, man.
Yeah,
Yeah, I've seen the
what's nice.
dynamic lighting. That's cool.
Yeah, yeah,
But definitely not based off of today's
not
topic.
required.
Not required at all. We've gotten away
No, but
with
it's just
playing just
nice and
fine
it's kind of cool.
forever. Oh,
That's the way I've only ever seen D&D played. It's only with this last campaign I was in before it had to be shelved. Was our DM had dynamic lighting. He had a macro on the characters, so
mm,
like I said with the colored health ring, so if you took damage, it would play a little like a blood spurt animation and take hit points away from your token, and the color start to go down from green to yellow, orange, and red.
that's cool.
And then it'd heal and it'd sparkle green and you'd be healed, so
That's cool. That is really
it
cool.
is, it really is. I also like D&D Beyond because if you get the browser extension
Yeah,
Beyond 20, you can roll your character sheet on D&D Beyond to roll 20.
that is a clever name. That is a clever name. I will admit. Beyond
Yes.
20. That's brilliant.
Yes.
I will say though, we should probably quickly note what players tend to see. Uh, what new players tend to see, and that's more bells and whistles than
Oh
actually
yeah, I know.
required. We should.
We got chaotic and went off topic.
Yeah, there's. Not really. I mean, off topic is kind of our thing, so is it really
It
off
really
topic if
is.
it's supposed to be off topic? But,
Just like as the expected ever if the expected if you oh my god, my brain died. If you ever expect the unexpected, does that make the unexpected expected?
these questions, man, blowing my mind.
Right.
But,
Totally.
um, I, I think first off we should note Do you need um maps and minis to be able to play? No, not at all.
No, you can use pretty much anything to represent your character
Yeah,
and minis and a map. You can draw one out by hand just using grid paper,
yeah,
and and it'd be a really good map. Just draw it out on grid paper, or just set up a bunch of items on the table and call it the map. It
yeah.
works.
I
All
and
you really need is your imagination at that point.
mm-hmm. And even then, you don't. Technically, the only thing you really need is your imagination. Because
Oh yeah,
I've
there's
watched multiple
yeah.
campaigns now that on YouTube that only used imagination. They said you're about this far away. The DM would describe how far away the people are, what the creatures look like instead of showing it on a book or a mini. Um,
I don't know if
they've never had
what it's
maps,
called
but
is I don't know if it's like what is it? At that point you only need your mind's eye when you're like
yes,
listening.
yes. I will say though, not everybody can play that way. There are people out there who really
No,
can't play with their mind's eye because it's just not powerful
and
enough to
need
envision that, and they can't keep track of all the information. At which time,
yeah,
minis and maps are really useful. But
exactly. Or any other sort of representation.
yeah, but yeah, minis and maps can get really expensive, and so
Hmm.
you don't. So a lot of people are like, "Oh, this is such an expensive hobby." It doesn't have to be. I I mean, to be 100% honest, I'm getting ready to DM a one shot just with my siblings and one of my sister's friends to see if you know we'd be good to have a cool group. Like if our group would be good to play together. And
Hmm.
as I'm like trying to think about like how would I DM this, well, we're not going to play virtual tabletop. We're going to play physical game. How are we going to do that? I have no maps. I have no minis. I have the equipment to make such things, but it's I have no place to make any of it. None of the advanced
Yeah,
stuff. So how am I going to make all
yeah,
this? Well, I
yeah.
just need for my maps. I just need a piece of paper and a pencil, and I can draw my maps. But what am I going to use for figures? I can use dice to represent my characters and monsters. I can use little pictures that I've drawn. But probably what I'm
Or
gonna
some sort of token or chip that you have laying around.
yeah.
Anything.
But one of my
Hell, even
favorite
a shiny little fish tank stone would work.
yeah, but one of my favorite things, one of my favorite ideas, because you can get so creative with this, even though it's like nothing. Because high chance you're gonna have this minifigures, Lego
Hmm.
minifigures.
Oh
Oh,
my
it's
god,
so
I never
brilliant.
would have thought of that.
It's such a brilliant idea. Lego minifigures work so perfectly, and if you have if you grew up like with Legos, or if you have kids with Legos, there's no reason why you can't use those. The high chance somebody's gonna have Legos. If even if it's only one person in your group who has them, just say, "Hey, can you bring your minifigures? I need them. I need them for our D&D game." They'd probably be more than willing. You know,
Yeah,
it's such a
yeah,
brilliant idea. And it shows that just with a little creativity and ingenuity, you can use literally anything to represent literally anything in your campaign. No
yes.
problem. So, while we see all these, professionally made stuff that looks really cool, but it's all really expensive, while we see all that stuff being used in professional instances, you don't need
Hmm.
them for your own home game, which I think is brilliant.
No, exactly. Yeah.
Um, Other things, you don't need 1,000 dice. Just the one set.
No.
Just the
Yeah.
one set. And they don't have to be fancy. They can be the normal, like the black and white six-sider with the dots.
Exactly.
You typically can buy a whole set. You can't, normally you can buy six-siders on their own. I've never seen any of the others sold on their own. They've all come in sets, so, except for, like,
I'm.
at stores that are dedicated to selling them separately, at which point they're probably going to get a bit expensive. So I would recommend just buying a whole set because that's probably cheaper than buying each one individually.
Yes. Yeah.
Um,
Or or my brother, what my brother did, he cheap mixed uh dice by the pound. You can buy them like that too, and it's hilarious. It's just mixed dice of all of them, the 20s, the 12s,
ooh,
8s, 10s, and 4s and 6s. It is just you buy them by the pound.
that's funny.
Yeah,
That's funny.
and we got tons of dice because he decided to do that. I think he turned into a dice goblin for a while.
Oh no, I'm a little bit of a dice goblin myself.
See, I would buy more dice if I had just to have them if I had a tabletop game to play and I'd have multiple sets. I'd
Hmm.
think I'd eventually turn into the superstitious roller. So if that D20 is rolling real low, no, you're done.
Yeah.
Next. See, now that I'm talking about dice out loud, I think I'm gonna start receiving a lot of advertisements on Facebook now. So that's gonna be fun.
Nice.
Be careful talking about dice around your electronics, people.
Seriously.
They know.
But but I just had a thought. Virtual tabletop gaming. We keep mentioning it, but we haven't addressed it yet.
Oh
What
no, yeah,
what do
true.
you
Roll
really
20.
need for virtual tabletop gaming? As a player on virtual tabletops, I've only ever played with Roll20, and I've always used maps and tokens. But they're not
Mm-hmm.
necessary, are they? Like I said earlier,
No.
I've watched multiple campaigns of people playing without maps and minis. That's because I was watching them play online and they were just playing over like some sort of face cam program. Like they were probably using Discord or something similar, you know?
Discord, or they were using like FaceTime or, Google, whatever.
Yeah. So at the very
And
base,
yeah,
at the
sorry. All you really need at that point is basically the character sheet created by the DM when they create the game room in Roll20. They'll create a game room, give you invites, and hand out character sheets on there. All you need is a character sheet to fill it out, and you just click on the sheet to roll the things you need.
yeah, it provides the dice for you. I if you're
Yeah.
trying to go full digital with it completely, I would say let me think. Like if you're one of those players who use theater of the mind to play, you know, if your group uses theater of the mind, you literally just need when it comes to like your ability to interact with the game, you just need
Mhm.
your Discord or voice program, maybe yeah, all you need is something that allows you to communicate with the rest of the group if you're playing online, which this is probably what you're doing with the current state of the world. Um, you at the most need
Yeah.
like something like FaceTime or Discord or whatever else. Those are the only things that you absolutely need. That's the only thing you need to be able to communicate. You don't need these
Mhm.
virtual tabletops. And at that point, I mean, you could have the physical Dyson book if you want and the paper if you want, or you could use if
Mhm.
you're trying to go full digital again, you could probably use D&D Beyond, which has all of
Yeah.
it does the most useful thing
It
of just
basically is.
writing out everything for you.
Yeah.
Does all the
Oh
math.
yeah, yeah. You just input all the things you want on there, what's available for selection based off race and character and background, and D&D will set up the character sheet all for you.
Mhm.
You can even export it to a PDF and print it off as a full character sheet too to play tabletop.
Yeah, which is very nice. Um
It is. I use the PDF. I look at PDFs occasionally on my characters so I can see what their lift, push, and drag weight limit is. And I think my Goliath I had that was a monk had like 900 pound,
I'm
uh,
sorry?
almost half. I think he had like almost half a ton of lift, pull, and drag weight limit.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
That's insane.
I don't remember how I did it. I'd have to go back and look at the sheet. I don't have it up right now.
Goodness.
But one of the other digital platforms to play D&D on that I hear is pretty popular, but you have to buy it, is Fantasy Grounds.
I've heard of it. I know nothing about it.
You have to. I think it's like I neither do I. I just know like a lot of people really like it and prefer it because it's got like more stuff to it than Roll 20. Roll 20 is the free. Oh my god, yes, it's free. Anyway, it's free. And Fantasy Grounds, you have to. I think you can. It's even on Steam. You can get it off of Steam too. It's like 45, 46 bucks or something like that
Oh
to
Lord,
buy into. Yeah,
Lord, no. I I wouldn't
yeah.
spend that money. I personally, I'm
Neither would
satisfied with
I.
Roll 20. If you're one of those people who
Same.
needs the physical tabletop, if you need to be able to see something, Roll 20, go straight there. If your group wants to play with maps and minis, go to Roll 20 because um the way it works is you can just create a room, invite everybody into the game, and then the dungeon master can create as many different tables as they need and throw all the maps on there that they want. And from there, they can then add tokens, those small images that will represent your different monsters. And you can do
Uh,
anything from just like colored
mhm.
images to full on art, but because it's the internet, you can grab it from literally anywhere, save it to your computer with no cost whatsoever, and throw it up onto the internet. Or throw it into Roll 20 and you're
Yeah,
good. That's what I do all the time. And if you're like me, I create my own art for some of the things. But
yeah.
that's literally all you need as a player. And just the dice, the core rules, and based off of what you're playing, physical or tabletop, or physical or virtual, you may or may not also need something to write stuff down on. Actually, you probably will either way because taking notes, but even
Mhm.
then, your whatever device you're using to play virtual tabletop probably has something to let you do that too. So
Mhm. Yeah.
in the end, just a set of dice, virtual or physical, a tabletop, virtual or physical, maybe maps and minis or tokens or whatever, virtual or
Mhm.
physical, the rules, virtual or physical. That's basically it, and something to take notes on.
Yeah. Oh, you should always have some form of notes.
And what's interesting, it doesn't always have to be written notes. A lot of my notes from throughout my years of playing Dungeons and Dragons have been small comics and pictures I've drawn.
Nice.
I know. That's probably one of my favorite things about Dungeons and Dragons is that I've been able to use my art to take notes. Perfect.
That's amazing.
I know. Actually, for a while, Darren would let me bypass the recap if I created a comic based off of what happened in the previous week.
Uh-huh.
So nice.
I have
I
a tendency to forget to take notes. If I take notes, it's so sparse that I don't remember what on earth it means.
mm, oh
But
yeah.
with this campaign that we're in now, the one you're running, I've literally got everything written down, like full massive things.
Yeah, it's very important to take notes. That is one thing that you should
Uh,
always do with Dungeons and Dragons. You should always take notes,
yes,
or at least someone should always take notes. One member of your party
yes.
should be taking notes at very least. I heard somebody have a method of taking notes where each week they would designate a different person to taking notes
Mm-hmm.
so that if everybody was constantly keeping track, you would have different people taking notes in different styles. Sometimes it would get a little confusing, but everybody was always taking notes so that everyone was always paying attention.
Yes, exactly.
One thing you absolutely do not need, and this is something very important that we should discuss, you absolutely do not need your phone unless it is your device for viewing the virtual tabletop or discussing on or communicating with the rest of your group. Unless you're using it for
Mm-hmm.
one of your virtual tools, do not have your phone out. Do not.
That's the that's one of the biggest ways to get people just really to not like you.
Yeah.
It really is. if you're gonna sit there on your phone and just wait and only act when you're called upon, yeah, it's the quickest way to get kicked off a table.
Yep, yep. That's probably another future episode. D&D etiquette.
Oh boy,
We'll
that's not something I'm too aware of, being only digital playing.
it's something that I've heard a lot of, despite having never, but despite having barely played physical tabletops. But I understand a lot of it
Hmm.
anyway. But we can get
Well,
we
it'll
can
be a new for me, and I think you'll be talking the most for it.
probably. I tend to do a lot of the talking, which I apologize for.
That's fine by me. I'm the chaotic one. I put in the chaos every once in a while. I gotta
Yeah.
keep
I,
the chaos.
I don't know. My brain's a little chaotic too. It tends to go on a bunch of strands at random moments. But
Oh yeah, yeah.
anyway,
Nothing wrong
um,
with going on a tangent.
yeah, chaos it reigns as always. But
Make it, yep, let chaos reign.
so yeah, players to that end, we've summarized what they need. Don't need to do it again. But what about
Yep.
dungeon masters? That's a little bit of
Oh,
a
that's
different
that's more for you,
story. Yeah, I'll get into that one, I guess. So, dungeon
because that entails a
masters,
lot of things.
dungeon masters. To begin, I will say, have the player's handbook. Please have the player's handbook on you at all times, because I cannot tell you how important it is whenever some question, some debate on the rules comes up and you have to answer it. If you know where to go flip straight to it. If you need to know something on it at a moment's notice, you have the player's handbook to flip straight through it. For players, the player's handbook is an option. For dungeon masters, it's a must because it has all the rules. Absolutely have the player's handbook on you. That said,
Mm-hmm.
Dungeon Master's Guide is pointless because I've skimmed through it and that's it. Nothing more to
Mm-hmm.
say. I don't even know most of the content in here. It's useful for whenever you need like quick tips and stuff, but if you're someone like me who knows how to homebrew on a dime, who improvises more often than anything else, this book is pointless because you're going to be creating your own content anyway,
Mm-hmm.
you know? For the Monster Manual, this is another invaluable book. An absolute must have because it's got a whole list of all the monsters. At least all the. Not all of them, but like all the important ones. Everything from basic cannon fodder to straight up gods and final bosses of the campaign. The BBEG, the big bad evil guy, the main enemy of the campaign. That it's got everything. Don't pay attention to the CR rating, to the challenge rating, because you can use it as a guideline, but never rely on it for a hard and fast rule, because if you know how to use them, any enemy in enough numbers can totally wreck something, to wreck a party, and some of these are not balanced anyway. But I digress. Player's Handbook and Monster Manual, absolute must-haves for a Dungeon Master. That said,
Mm-hmm.
what else do you need? A set of dice, just like with the players, but I would recommend having 2 sets of dice. It's not necessary, but it's absolutely worth it, because typically you'll be rolling more dice than the players, and because of that, you'll want to have more dice at your disposal. Now, I've played virtual tabletop for my DMing, so I can't 100% say with certainty how that would be. But knowing that I've rolled quite a lot as a DM, you're probably going to need more dice. So have at least 2, maybe 3 sets on you.
Mm-hmm.
You'll be thankful you had them. Note taking is a must have, so you absolutely must have notes ready to be taken at any time. So anything to write down on. I tend to write all my notes into a program that I use, a website called World Anvil. Not sponsored. R.I.P. that dream. But
That's a long ways off,
that's
I
a
think.
long ways. But World Anvil is absolutely as a I hands down love this website. I haven't paid for any of their paid services because I just don't have that money. But to be 100% honest, some of their paid services seem pretty darn useful. But even then,
Hmm.
the worst thing that's come to me so far, I've run out of articles I can create. So without posting them, like
Hmm.
so I just have to post my articles and I can continue creating. I can't have any. I have a certain number of drafts that I'm allowed to have, but I don't know about any full-on finished articles. I think those can be posted as many as you want. I don't know that for a fact,
Hmm.
but the tools on World Anvil very very useful. There's a lot of diversity there. Highly recommend that. But anything that you can use to take notes, be it a piece of paper, some special program like World Anvil, or just Google Docs or whatever, any of that,
Hmm.
I would highly recommend. Absolutely a necessity because you are always going to have something to take notes about. I'm constantly noting that of what the players have done each week. Every session they've done something different, I'm like, "Oh, I got to note this, I got to note that, got to write down all of these things." Sorry if you guys can hear all of my family yelling in the background. Um but
It,
aside
it's
Oh yeah.
it's unintelligible. Like, it's you can't understand what's going on. I just heard noise. That's all.
That's fair. Um what was I saying? Yeah, note taking.
Um.
Absolute must.
Yes.
When it when it comes to the theater of the mind, that's about it. Just have the rules, the notes, the dice. That's about it. The two books, absolutely have those, and try to have the rules memorized as best you can. If you're a first time DM, if you're like a whole first time group and one of you has to DM and none of you has any experience, fair. Just read through the books as best you can so that you have an idea of what you need of the rules. But it's a learning experience for everyone. It's no problem. Um,
Hmm.
but when it comes to actually having physical representations for your stuff, your maps and your minis, like we said earlier, you can have literally anything. Grid paper, just draw them out on draw your maps out on a piece of paper. Use anything to represent them between small stones, game pieces, and again, minifigures, Lego minifigures. Those would work too. But basically, everything we noted prior, you should absolutely have as a DM, plus the player's handbook and the Dungeon Master's Guide are absolute musts for the Dungeon Master.
Hmm.
And that's it for like physical items. When it comes to the actual, like when it comes to finding a group, it's the same thing again, but as the Dungeon Master, you're kind of the head of the group, whether you like it or not. And so as a result, you have to make a lot of decisions: who joins, who doesn't, who stays, and who has to get kicked out of the game because
Hmm.
everybody's there to have fun. And as a result, when the dungeon master, who's the one in charge of presenting the game, um, sees that there is something going on between two or more players, then it's their job to make sure that that gets settled one way or another.
Yeah.
Another thing, like I said earlier, absolutely have a good understanding of the rules, at least a very basic understanding. Understand what each die is for, what they're used for most often. Understand what um, an average roll between versus a high roll versus a low roll are. Um,
Hmm.
Understanding
When
game,
exactly, also when exactly crit fails take place and net 20s too.
yeah, and understand how you can twist the rules to better fit the situation. Rule of cool is very controversial, but I personally support it to a certain level. It gets a little outlandish at times if you go too far with it, so be careful with it. But for those of you who don't know what the rule of cool is, it's basically if something is going. If you want. What's the word? Vehicles. Um, it's basically setting aside the suspension of disbelief. It's a suspension of disbelief for the moment to enjoy some fun,
Hmm.
just to enjoy the moment and see something cool happen.
Hmm.
Rule of cool is controversial. It depends on who you're playing with, but understand how the rule of cool and similar ideas can, should, and shouldn't be utilized in Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah,
If you're DMing a one shot, it's very different from if you're DMing a campaign. You
those are,
know?
I would assume, would be a little easier than making an entire world or
Oh,
um, using a pre-made module.
yes.
I think one shots would probably be just a little easier. 9 times out of 10, it's just a dungeon crawl.
That depends on who the DM is. The more you've
True.
experienced, the more
Every one shot I've been in is just a dungeon crawl, a specialized dungeon.
I'm sure every DM has a different way of running a one shot, and every DM, and the more experienced a DM is, the better. You know. Um, that said, not all experienced DMs are great, and not all unexperienced DMs are bad. But that said, um,
Not, yeah, it'll take the right time to find the right DM for what you want to
anything,
play.
yeah.
Or
Which,
yeah, anything. Take time to find the right DM for anything.
yeah, which that's another thing that I'll get into in a minute. But real quick, when you're planning a one shot versus a campaign, some things to take note on. If you're planning a one shot, do not plan an entire world. Only plan
Yeah.
the necessary set pieces that you may need.
Uh-huh.
Um, that you can prepare a little in advance. If you're expecting the one shot to take place in a city and the surrounding area, then that's fine. You know,
Hmm.
just plan
Yeah,
that. But if
one
you're
shots could also be offshoots of a campaign, like if a character needed to specifically go on an adventure to find a certain item that pertains to their backstory, it could be turned into a one-shot side adventure too.
yes,
I've seen things like that, and I thoroughly enjoy the idea of having one-shots that are connected and chain linked to the main campaign.
I do too. Um, if you're preparing a campaign, I would say prepare a generalized idea of a world, but no more than a generalized idea. Plus, a little more
Yeah.
specifics in where you're expecting the party to be at the beginning of the campaign. Then start to flesh
Hmm.
things out based off of what happens the first session, then the second, and so on. You know? Uh,
Yeah.
when it comes to your group, real quick, I should note you should absolutely understand what it is that makes um your player characters unique, and try to understand your players,
Hmm.
because that's really necessary. Like that's a very necessary part. You're not the only person in this group, and you're not here to tell your story. You're here to tell their story. You know. So as a dungeon master,
Mhm.
you should have a level of respect for your players and their characters, and try your best to implement them into the campaign as best you can. Always keep your players involved, and involve your player characters to the best of your ability. Sometimes you can't help it.
Mhm.
The campaign's going to get away, and it's not going to tell anyone's story but yours. That's fine. Things happen like that.
Mhm.
Just don't let it center around your idea of a story. Let it center around the characters and how they interact with the world. And if they happen to
Mhm.
mesh with your story, that's great. But it's their story, not yours. It's kind of getting into like life advice level for dungeon masters, but it's really hard to wrangle in what makes or what is necessary for a DM because there's a lot more that goes into DMing. Players basic understanding of the rules, having the player's handbook optional, we've already listed everything. Dungeon Masters,
Mhm.
it gets way difficult, way more difficult, especially if you're planning to do a campaign instead of a one shot. If it's a one shot, it's a lot simpler. If it's a campaign, it gets difficult. And as a dungeon master, again, you're basically lord of the table at the time. And as a result, you
Mhm.
have to understand how to manage the table, and the players are at it, and make sure that everyone understands the rules and things go smoothly. No arguments happen, and if they do, make sure they get diffused quickly and resolved satisfyingly.
Mhm.
Being a dungeon master is hard. That's another thing. That's the one other thing that I will say a player or a dungeon master absolutely needs. That's a level of confidence unmatched by anyone else at the table. You have to be ready to be a dungeon master. You have to, and when I say ready, you don't have to understand the rules. You don't have to understand your characters. You don't even have to have a plan. You just have to be ready to take responsibility for everything that's about to happen.
Mhm.
Aside from your player's own stupidity. If a player is being mean or hateful, it's your responsibility to deal with it. It's not your responsibility to to take accountability. You have to hold them accountable for that. But
Mhm.
yeah, being a dungeon master is hard and requires confidence and the ability to just accept that you are about to be this. You're not the center of the show, but you are the center of attention to an extent.
Mhm.
And everybody else relies on you to make sure that they're having a fun time. So just be ready for that type of responsibility, I guess. And that's all I got without getting too much further into life advice for as a DM.
Mhm.
It's it's an interesting game and it sounds intimidating, but I would say the one thing that every person needs when at a table ready to play Dungeons and Dragons, it's just a mindset going into it knowing that it's a game and they're there everyone's there to have fun and that you're all like-minded people here to just play make believe just like you were when you were kids.
Mhm.
You know?
Yeah, exactly.
Any other notes, Matt? Because I've been talking for a hot minute.
You know, I I have no idea. We've basically gone through pretty much everything.
Yeah, we basically have all of the physical tools you need, mental tools, sort of,
Mhm. Yeah.
and just an
Um.
understanding that your game will never go perfect. Not the first time,
Nope.
not the 100th time, not the 1000th time. Nothing will
There's
ever
no
go
such thing
perfect.
as perfect in the world of D&D. It's all down to the number gods.
Yep. And yeah, that's yeah. You gotta accept
Sometimes your
the
rolls
dice
will be
there.
really bad. Yep. Sometimes your rolls really bad. You might lose a character pretty quick if you ain't got it. If the dice don't want to cooperate. I'm not sure if it's unfortunate or fortunate. I haven't experienced a character death yet. Most of the campaigns I'm in don't ever last that long.
I have, but I experienced them all in the same campaign, and that campaign was Doom of Annihilation, which I was using more as an experimentation to understand what type of characters I played the best.
Mm-hmm.
Which I've discovered, not angsty characters, and I've also discovered characters that don't rely on their speech abilities to get their way.
Mm-hmm.
I basically more speak with actions or like a child, or either.
Yes.
But yeah.
Other than that, do you have a topic change or?
I personally don't. That's honestly.
I think we've run out of things for the moment.
I think we have. But I think that's fine because this has been a little bit of a different topic from what we normally cover.
Yeah.
So.
A more in-depth topic. Most of the time, it's just us rambling about whatever D&D and just talking about things we like.
Which is that's fun, but this is a nice.
Oh, that's fun. Yeah. Yeah.
It's just a nice change of pace for a minute. So, and it's a little shorter.
Yeah.
So maybe a little nicer for the YouTube algorithm.
Yeah, this episode might definitely be a little bit shorter. It probably will be. It is going to be, actually.
Yes, we are only an hour.
I can make it look like an hour and 15 minutes on my end because I started the stream earlier.
Hour and 10 minutes for me, so on my recording.
Yeah. Well, if today's a short episode, well, at this rate, I think might as well cut the stream here for now. If you guys enjoyed watching and listening to us ramble on about anything and everything here, hit the follow button. It'd be much appreciated. It helps, and we will catch you guys next time.
Yeah. Bye.
See ya. Okay, that's done.